So when you say they could find me as a black person, you couldn't find a Jew, well, they managed to find 6 million of them. Hello everybody and welcome to JTV. So the famous talk show host and actor Whoopi Goldberg has reiterated her comments that she made about the Holocaust. She made them 10 months ago. They caused a huge storm and backlash, certainly from Jewish communities and from her own TV show, The View. And then she apologized for them, but now she's just reiterated them in an interview. And she said that the Holocaust was a case of white-on-white oppression, and that it was not racism. Okay, the Holocaust was not about race, apparently. And she said that, quote, and this was just now, remember who they were killing first. They were not killing racial. They were killing physical. They were killing people they considered to be mentally defective, and then they made this decision. And the article says that the reporter reminded Goldberg that, quote, the Nazis measured the heads and noses of Jews to prove they were a distinct race, and Goldberg stood firm. She said, quote, yeah, but they did that to black people too. But it doesn't change the fact that you could not tell a Jew on a street. You could find me, you couldn't find them. That was the point I was making. But you would have thought that I'd taken a big old stinky dump on the table. Okay, we're going to just stop quoting Whoopi at this point. Whoopi, I'm really perplexed. I think this is going to be the theme of this video. I don't want to compare oppressions of different peoples and different groups. All oppression is really bad and should not happen, okay? But let's just not dilute or pervert terrible sufferings and experience that happened, okay? So when you say they could find me as a black person, you couldn't find a Jew, well, they managed to find 6 million of them. They would have tracked down my grandfather, who, had he not left his town in Poland, Nowy Sącz, just a few days prior to the Nazis getting to that town, I would not be here, okay? They managed to find a lot of Jews, actually, about 1/3 of the world's Jewish population, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. So this idea of not tracking down people because they're Jewish, I mean, that is that is so insulting. I mean, Jews even in America, when they go down to the South, you say that the KKK would be able to find someone because they're black, of course, but maybe not someone if they're Jewish. That is not what happened to many Jewish people who went down to the South once the KKK found out that they were Jews. Now again, I'm not denying that there are going to be different experiences of oppression based on what kind of peoples you're part of and what your history you have. And yes, in the perspective of skin color, someone that's black can be determined to be black perhaps more quickly than someone can be determined to be Jewish. I accept that point, but again, what is your point? That Nazis certainly considered the Jews to be a separate, distinct race, seeing them as having different ethnic and racial characteristics. And you're saying, yeah, but it was white on white and it was wrong to see them as a separate race. First of all, even if it was wrong, as a matter of fact, they did see them as a different race. I mean, I'll just quote to you. This is an excerpt from Adolf Hitler's letter on the dangers currently presented by Jewry to our nation, written in 16th of September 1919. And he said, anti-Semitism is a political movement. It must not be and cannot be determined by emotional factors, but instead through recognition of the following facts. Firstly, Jews are definitely a race and not a religious belief. The Jew has in general preserved his race and character much more rigorously than many of the peoples among whom he lives. As a result, living among us is a non-German alien race. Now, whether or not you think he was right or wrong to deem the Jewish people a race, and by the way, I actually think it's more complicated than just seeing them as a race as well. But he did see them as a race. So I'm trying to understand what are you trying to say here? And then on the other hand, you say it was white on white. It wasn't about race or racism, but it was white on white. The first irony is, and this is what part of the reason why I don't think Jews are just a race, is that Jews come in all different colours and ethnicities, because you have Jews who are from all parts of the world. You can have black Jews, you have white Jews, you can have Jews from like Arab lands and dark skins and lighter skin tones, and there are Jewish communities in Asia. And you go to Israel and you'll see Jews from so many parts of the world and looking all different shades of skin colour. Many from Arab territories, many from Europe and Russia and elsewhere. And so this characterising of Jews as just being white, and it was just a white thing, it's such a lazy definition and description. And I would ask the question, which is, why are you saying this? Why are you creating these descriptions and portrayals of the Holocaust in this way, saying it wasn't about race and it was white on white? It feels to me, Whoopi, that what you're trying to do is dilute, warp, undermine, lessen how bad we see the Holocaust to be. Because, well, it wasn't real racism, like the kind of experiences that others have had. And, you know, well, it was white on white, so it's just white people being their usual bad selves. That's how it feels like what you're trying to do. And that is why it's creating a great deal of offence, both because it's seen as an inaccurate understanding, so it's miseducating people, but it also feels like it's coming from a pretty dark, unempathetic, even malevolent place. And I would urge you to reflect and think about why you're saying what you're saying. For me, I think the question of who the Jewish people are and whether it is racism or a religion or a people or a nation, it's not a straightforward question. Jews don't fit neatly into any one box. But what's interesting about Hitler is that he acknowledged that Jews didn't fit neatly into any one box, but he still held by his theories of Jews being a race. Why? Well, the problem that he had, the problem that one has when you're trying to categorize Jews as a race, is that anyone can become Jewish. Anyone can become a Jew. So you can't become any ethnicity you want to, right? I can't suddenly change my race. And so how do we then become a race? Now, you could say, well, the majority of Jews come from one, group of people in the Middle East. But ultimately, he wants to get rid of every single Jew, and he was concerned with every single Jew. And Hitler's understanding and his explanation is revealed, I think, in a quote that he said, and I've got it up here, and he said, quote, "If one little Jewish boy survives, without any Jewish education, with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, it's in his soul. And even if," he said, "there had never been a synagogue, or a Jewish school, or an Old Testament, the Jewish spirit would still exist and exert its influence. It has been there from the beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify it." So actually, the interesting part is that while Hitler spoke about it in racial terms, in other words, something that cannot be changed, his way of getting around the fact that anyone can become a Jew is that he said, quote, "It is in his or her soul." And strangely enough, about so many of the insights that Hitler had into the role of the Jewish people in the world, in terms of bringing morality to the world, which he saw as a weakening force, but we see as a badge of honor and duty, he again understood that every single Jew, whether they are a convert or born Jewish, they are part of a collective soul, and that's how we actually see Jews to be. We're neither a race nor a religion, but an assemblage of souls. In fact, the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, talk about the Jewish people as being one collective soul. And I would say, in the most natural terms, that could be described as being a nation. But the point is, Hitler used racial language to describe Jews as basically having something that's unchangeable. And he worked his way around the issue of Jews coming from different ethnicities to say that it's about something in their soul. So it was a bit more complex than that, but to say that racism and race and racial theories and all those kind of things had nothing to do with it, or that it's white and white, I don't see why you would say this if you're being objective. The only reason why I can think you're saying this is because it's somehow trying to undermine the suffering or lessen the suffering because, well, if it wasn't real racism or if it was white on white, well, how much do white people really suffer? That's what it feels like is going on. Now, why would you do that? Well, part of the reason why people do this, I think, was articulated by the writer and social commentator Howard Jacobson when he said that Europe and the world never forgave the Jews the Holocaust. What does he mean by that? Never forgave us for the Holocaust? It means hated the fact that they suddenly felt guilty about what happened. The world, Europe, has to carry around a certain sense of guilt for what they allowed to happen. And if Jews can no longer be seen as having suffered that much, or today being fully privileged and totally invulnerable to any kinds of prejudice, then you don't have to feel that weight or that guilt so much. The other reason is, as articulated by David Bernstein in his book Woke Anti-Semitism, we actually did an interview with him a while back, which we'll put a link to that in our description. The other reason is, as he said, that the Jewish story and what happened in the Holocaust and afterwards, it breaks the far left woke paradigm, which is to say, if you suffer, if you go through challenge, then you're a victim, and it divides the world purely into oppressed and oppressor. The Jewish story breaks that mold because Jews, despite going through a huge amount of suffering throughout history, unprecedented levels of suffering, exterminationist persecution, have constantly, disproportionately risen above their challenges and thrived and been disproportionately successful in their societies that they live in and move to, often because of persecution, having fled somewhere else. And if you want to say that the world is divided between the oppressed and the oppressor, the Jews break that paradigm, they break that explanation, because they show that it's more complicated than that, and actually you can survive, you can thrive, and you don't have to always point the finger of blame. You should protect yourself and you should be vigilant, but it's not helpful to always be a perpetual victim and a perpetual finger pointer. But it's an uncomfortable message because it forces us to think about the responsibilities that we could take rather than ask others to. So I would urge Whoopi Goldberg to reconsider what she has said, because it is at best lazy in characterizing the Holocaust, but at worst it is a subversion and it is a insulting warping of what really happened. I'm Ollie Annisfeld and you're watching JTV.